So like ForeFlight, Navigator, Evolution, those app vendors have an interface into our system where if you're filing a flight plan on their system, on their app, it comes to us. We record it, we store it, and if it's an IFR flight plan, we'll send it off to center. Everything we do on the web, our pilot web, is available to the third-party vendors. And that's all of these guys here on the left-hand side. The green check marks means that these vendors are actively participating with us. We're sending them briefings and they're giving us flight plans. If it's in yellow or orange, it means that we're actively testing with them right now in our labs, and we'll have them up and running very shortly. On the right-hand side, you see position reporting devices. I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of these vendors, SpiderTrax and DeLorme and Spot and Garmin. They provide position reports when you're flying along. Now, if you give them permission, what they do is they will send that position information into flight service. What we do under the covers is once you activate a flight plan and you subscribe to this service, we'll start monitoring the position of the aircraft along the route. We don't do anything with it unless there's a problem. And we're going to get into that later on. And like I said, everything you see here, there's no charge for it except, I guess, whatever you're paying for that charge with those third-party vendors. There's no additional fees from us. All right, what's the benefit of going to our website and using an app vendor that interfaces with us? The reason we built the pilot web was because of complaints by pilots. They would call us and say, look, I filed a flight plan with you. I filed a flight plan 4 hours ago. I'm calling you. How come you don't have my flight plan? Well, there's reasons why. And if you happen to file your flight plan with another vendor, where's my mouse? On this side over here, we don't get their flight plans, VFR flight plans, until an hour prior to departure time. So if you filed it yesterday and you call us a couple hours before your flight and you're looking for a briefing, we don't have it yet. And when we do get it, it doesn't have a route, it doesn't have the speed, and that's why we're asking you to to give us all that information again. If you happen to file an IFR flight plan, we don't get those flight plans at all. Those vendors send those directly into air traffic control, so when you ask for a briefing on that flight plan, we have to get all the information all over again. The solution was to build a pilot web that interfaces with our system. So when you log on to the pilot web, anything you do on that pilot web comes into the Lockheed Martin Flight Service system. Same thing with the app vendors on the previous page. When they file flight plans, they come directly to us. And when they request briefings, we're the ones that send them to them. They send us a VFR flight plan, we hold on to it, you call up for a briefing, we have the information, we can service you. You can file that flight plan 3 days in advance, and we'll have it on file. If it's an IFR flight plan, we still retain it, but we also send it to the appropriate ATC facility. But again, call in, we can at least give you a briefing. And we can amend your flight plan too. The good thing here on an IFR flight plan, our system allows you to amend or make changes to that flight plan up to 30 minutes prior to your departure. You can't do that on other sites. So if you're constantly, not constantly, but if you do make a change to your flight plan, you can amend it, or you call flight service and they'll amend it for you. All right, so once we got the website in place and we were happy with the ability to file your flight plans, take your flight plans in, give you briefings, we thought to ourselves, what's the next thing we need to change? And briefings was the first thing that came to mind. Right now, you go online, you get a briefing, you do a 50-mile flight, you're looking at a 60-page briefing. And there's a lot of information in there. And quite frankly, it's good information. It's just, how do I get that information out and into my brain and know and give me a picture of what that flight's going to look like? That's what we did with our pilot web and what we call next generation briefing. We're taking 20-year-old technology that just keeps getting pushed from year to year. I mean, we don't, the data, it just keeps growing and the format of it doesn't change. What we do is reformat it for you and present it to you in an understandable and just how, so you can understand it easier. I'm not going to go into the objectives and the features. We're going to touch on all of those things as we step through the presentation. Before I go into the next gen briefing itself, I'm going to just give you a high level overview of what our briefing, the layout looks like. Our briefing output is based on tabs. Touch a tab or click on a tab and it'll bring that information forward. We start with the adverse conditions and then we work our way through. What you're looking at here is the METAR display. I clicked on current weather. The first thing that pops up is METARs, and I'm in what we call next gen mode. We have a standard mode over here, and that is the old, just give me all my raw data and I'll dump it out to you. We default our engine to, we default the display to a next gen mode. And you'll see we have previous and next buttons, and we can step through this, and I'm going to go through that now. So over here on the left-hand side, we have the METARs for a flight from Pittsburgh over to Atlantic City. The first page we give you is a high-level overview of what that flight looks like. You'll see that we color code the stations in green. We have blue for marginal, red for IFR, and we have some low IFR down there, which is pink or magenta. We also do that in the text piece of it as well. And if you want to see this in plain text, we have the ability just to default everything to plain text or coded versus decoded, plain text or not. And this is all coded information. Now, this gives you a good picture. There's your route, and here's your corridor. Everybody asks, why do you have a corridor around your route? We are required to give you information and data that is contained within 25 miles, both sides of the route. So here's my route, Pittsburgh to Atlantic City. I go 25 miles this way. I go 25 miles that way. Everything that's inside that corridor must be presented to you guys. Same thing with a specialist. So now I click on this next button, and what it does is it gives me a summary. So when you call flight service and you get a briefing, do they read off all 25, 30 METARs to you? No. What they do is they give you your departure station information, and that's what we do here for Pittsburgh, and we highlight what that condition is. In this case, it's VFR. Then what a specialist does, they give you a grouping of stations along your route of flight, and that's what the pilot web does. We tell you that it's mostly VFR with some marginal VFR through Lancaster. And then you'll notice that we highlight the worst condition in that grouping. We go to the next section and it says IFR and marginal VFR through South Jersey. And again, we highlight the worst condition in that group of METAR stations. And at the end, we give you your destination. We just decode the destination station and we tell you what the condition is. So now I've taken 25, 30 METARs and I've given you 4 sentences to read. All the data is there if you want to go back and look at every METAR station, but when you call flight service, this is what they're giving you over the phone. And I forgot to mention, if anybody has any questions along the way, please stop me and ask. I would much rather it be an interactive discussion. Okay, let's move on to TAFs. We all can read a TAF. We know how to decode it. We know what's there. There's a lot of information in a TAF, and there's a lot of good information in a TAF. I know I cannot just look at a TAF and determine which forecast time period I'm going to be in as I move along my route of flight. I can do it. It takes a while. But what our system does is it decodes, and doesn't decode it. It calculates your passing time from Pittsburgh over to Atlantic City, and it puts the passing time that you're going to pass each of those stations. So at Wilmington, I'm going to be passing Wilmington at 2020Z, At Philly, I'm going to be passing it at 2030, so on and so forth. And the way we calculate these passing times is based on your aircraft characteristics and the winds aloft. So when you're filling out a profile, an aircraft profile, when you first log on, make sure you put your aircraft performance characteristics in there. Because if you don't do that, you're only going to get this stuff based on the winds. So like I said, as you're moving from left to right here, you'll see that you have pretty much VFR conditions. And if you remember, we had a front that was moving through the western part of Jersey, and then obviously it's going to move off the coast. You'll see that these stations have, these icons have 3 colors to them, or the potential to have 3 colors. The center color indicates the condition of that TAF station when you pass it. So when you pass Philly, which is going to be calculated to be 2030, it's going to be marginal. If you get there up to an hour early, you're going to be in IFR conditions. If you happen to get there up to an hour late, you'll be in VFR conditions. So all this information over here is incredibly helpful, but this graphic kind of paints a picture that as you move from the west going over to the east, if you delay your flight by an hour or 2, things are going to start to get to be more VFR. And that's what we'd expect in the Northeast. The fronts typically move left to right or from the south up to the north. And I know they can take different paths, but that's the typical movement. Any questions on TAFs? Just trying to make this information easier to digest. We highlight and color code so you can, at a glance, pick out what those stations are going to be as you go from your departure to your destination. The other graphic we like is the PIREPs. PIREPs are really good information. They're coming right from the pilot, and who else better to give us information than the pilot? Unless you're intimately knowledgeable about where these locations are along your route of flight, it's difficult to get a visual of where they are located. So what we do is we graph them for you. We plot them along. Here's your route of flight. Here's your corridor. And for instance, you take a look at that guy, and that's an urgent PIREP. Something you want to be cognizant of. So you look back over here, you figure out what it is. At least now you know. Good situational awareness. And we use the coding, the standard coding symbology for all of the AIRMETs. I mean, for the PIREPs. We do something called time analysis. It's easy to plot a particular phenomenon like a TFR or an AIRMET or a SIGMET like we do up here. We plot all of these guys for you, so you don't have to sit there and figure out where they're located. This is a TFR around DC. Everybody knows it. But if you had something else that was a little bit different, we would plot that for you. So we plot everything up here, and we calculate the time that you're going to be entering that particular TFR, and we calculate the time you're going to be exiting the TFR. So in this particular case, I'm exiting the TFR here at that time, and I'm exiting the TFR at that time. And why is it red? It's because it's going to be active at the time I'm proposed to leave. If it happened to be orange or a dark yellow, it's telling me that it's going to be active within an hour of my departure time or my flight time. And if it's green, the active time and my passing time are an hour apart or greater than an hour apart. So red obviously is a warning. And the other thing I wanted to point out, here's your route. If we were to zoom in on here, you would see we're entering this TFR. We're entering this TFR here. We're exiting the TFR there, and it's red. DC happens to be hot all the time. There is no downtime for DC. We incorporated something called smart plain text translation, and everybody can read an AIRMET, and that's the AIRMET. That's the raw data for the AIRMET. And if you want to see it in plain text, we can blow it out for you. But I can't look at that and tell you where that's located. So what we do is we draw the AIRMET for you over here. And again, we calculate the entry time and exit time into that. This one's an odd one because it just really touches the corridor, but it tells you when you enter and exit that particular AIRMET. Now, if I'm going to take the time to draw that AIRMET for you, why should I decode the location of it? We don't. All we do is give you the condition of the AIRMET. We do that with center weather advisories and convective SIGMETs. We don't take the time or bother to, we don't want to decode stuff that is meaningless for you guys. All I want to know is, okay, here's the AIRMET, and this is the condition of the AIRMET. That's all I need to know. Filtering's a big discussion topic with pilots. It's a flight I used to make a lot when my son was at Blacksburg. I like to throw out a little quiz. What's unique about this particular flight going from Lynchburg down into Mount Airy? With respect to an area forecast? The key thing here is this dividing line divides the northeast area forecast with the southeast area forecast, right? So what am I going to get? In a traditional area forecast, I'm going to get everything from Maine down to Florida. And all I'm doing is traveling 100 miles from Lynchburg down to Mount Airy. I don't need to know about Maine. I don't need to know about Pennsylvania. I don't need to know about Connecticut or Florida. So what our system does is it just presents the information of the areas that you penetrate. So in this particular case, you're penetrating or you're leaving Virginia. We also have Maryland. You ask, why do you have Maryland and Delaware in there? Because that's what the National Weather Service gives us. We can't break it down any more granular than what they give us. If I click on this next button right here, I drop down to North Carolina. But that's it. You'll notice that there's nothing else down here. If I want to see the area forecast for all of the other states on the East Coast, I can just go back to my standard briefing or click on this all tab over here, and it'll show me everything that I want. But as a pilot, I don't really care. I don't need to know anything else. All right, obstruction NOTAMs. There's a lot of them out there. This is a relatively short flight, so there's not too many, but there's still a lot. If I'm flying at 95, do I need to know about obstructions that are at 3,000 feet if I'm en route? I mean, unless you're doing something really off the wall, I mean, you just don't need to know those kinds of things. So what we do is we color code the obstructions for you. If it's black, it means it's greater than 1,000 feet from your filed altitude. If it's orange, it means it's within 1,000 feet of your filed altitude. And if it's red, it's within 500 feet of your filed altitude. We give you one other feature here. If you click on this button up here, what it does is it removes all of the obstructions that are greater than 1,000 feet from your filed altitude. Again, we're not trying to take the thinking out of what you guys have to do. We're just trying to give you information that makes it easier for you to digest and give you a better picture of what you have to deal with. If you want to see everything, just go to this all tab and you can be inundated with information. Same thing with nav NOTAMs. This particular route doesn't have a lot of nav NOTAMs showing up, but there's a lot here. And there's nav NOTAMs that I don't need to know about. Especially, I'm VFR, so I don't need to know my ILS NOTAMs along the route. Even if I'm IFR, I don't need to know my ILS NOTAMs along the route of flight. If I'm not military, I don't need to know about TACAN NOTAMs, and I'm not using NDB NOTAMs. I don't care about them. So I click on these buttons, and it removes the data I don't want to see. It's still there. I click on it again, and it'll bring it all back to me. But again, we're giving you the ability to filter out things you don't need to see. Okay, so that covers at a high level what our next generation briefing looks like. We made a lot of efficiency type changes and safety enhancements. One of the big things or requests we got was, well, I just did a briefing 2 hours ago, 3 hours ago. I just want to see what my changes are with respect to adverse conditions. So we gave you a button. If you request a briefing and you request another one within 6 hours, and there's any adverse conditions that have popped up within that 6 hour period, we'll give you a tab called Delta here, Delta Briefing, and we put all of the changes that have occurred or that have popped up since your last briefing. If you're outside that 6 hours, you're going to get a standard briefing. So you have to submit a standard briefing. If you, anytime within 6 hours you submit another briefing, we will pop up this Delta Briefing tab, and it'll highlight anything that has changed. We're going to talk about some flight planning tools, the Evaluate button, the Optimize button, that's for the altitude, and Plan a Route button. This is our standard flight plan template, pretty straightforward. All these icons here, these little, you click on those and it gives you information on that particular cell. And if you hover over any of these labels, it'll give you information on how to format that particular cell. I threw in the ICAO template just to show you. We do the same thing here. You hover over these, like an aircraft type or a wake turbulence, and it'll give you the format. Come October 1, the FAA has said to us that we're gonna start going all ICAO format. So maybe something you want to start practicing now or using now, so when September 30th comes, you're not, learning how to put in an ICAO flight plan. However, it's not as scary as everybody thinks it is. It's just not. The biggest areas of concern are your aircraft equipment, your surveillance equipment, and other information. But we give you help dialog button. You hover over this aircraft equipment, and it'll give you the format it needs to be in, like cruising speed or altitude. Let's take altitude, your level. Instead of just putting 095 in there, you have to put A095. If you're at flight levels like 180 and above, you have to put an F in front of it, F180. Just little things like that. Cruising speed, instead of just putting in 160, you've got to put in N0160. And our website goes into all of that just by hovering over the particular field. Aircraft equipment, all you do is click on that button and it'll give you all the options for aircraft equipment. You select the ones you want, it brings it in, we put it in the right format for you. Same thing with surveillance equipment. Just click on that button, select what you have. Let's say you have ADS-B out, because that's going to be coming up. If you have something in your aircraft, you click on it and it brings it in automatically. The good thing is, once you have all this information, if you save this flight plan as a favorite, you never have to enter in that information again. You can put in all your survival equipment, everything that you type on this page will be saved except for your departure date and time. When you log into the system, it defaults to the current date and time. Current date, not the time. So the bottom line here is, don't be afraid of the ICAO flight plan mask. It's really not that bad. One other thing, when you log into the system, go to your aircraft page, and you can put in your aircraft equipment there, and it'll save it for you there, both your NASA equipment and your ICAO equipment, and whenever you call up the flight plan mask, it'll be there. Okay, we touched on altitude optimization. If you want a quick look at what your fuel burn rate is or how long it's going to take you en route, take your altitude, you put in 95, you put 95 in there, you hit optimize, and it tells you what your time en route is going to be and what the fuel burn is. But what we also do is give you two altitude, we give you 2,000 feet above and 4,000 feet above. and we give you 2,000 feet below and 4,000 feet below. You're comfortable at 95, you just cancel that out, you're good. Or if you want to select a different altitude, select it, hit the select button, and it brings it back into your flight plan mask. This is just a quick visual of what the system is calculating for your en route time and your fuel burn. And again, you have to have aircraft characteristics in your aircraft profile, or these don't, or you just don't get accurate data. You're basing everything on winds aloft. Departure planning tool. We've got a lot of requests from pilots to say, you know, I know I'm going to leave, or I want to leave at say 5 o'clock, but if 5 o'clock's not good, maybe I got some lingering, you know, marginal or IFR weather hanging on. Can you tell me what the conditions are going to be before 5 o'clock and after 5 o'clock? And we thought, man, that's a really good idea. So what we did is we give you, here's your 5 o'clock departure time. That's what you requested. And what we do, based on the terminal area forecast, we go out and figure out and determine what the conditions are along that route of flight from departure to destination. We also go back 6 hours and we go ahead 6 hours. Now, if you're a VFR pilot and you see this, chances are you're not going at 5 o'clock. This is not a substitute for a briefing. This is just at a glance, does my flight look like it's reasonable? Should I even think about it? You'll notice you have hash marks here. That means there are some type of adverse condition along your route of flight at that particular time. You cannot tell from this particular picture what that adverse condition is. It could be a TFR. It could be a center weather advisory. It could be a convective SIGMET. This is to give you an overview of what your flight's going to look like at 5 o'clock and 6 hours before and 6 hours after. If you're good with 5 o'clock, you just hit the cancel button. Or if you're, you know, comfortable at leaving, you know, 5 or 6 hours early, you hit 23, hit the select, it brings it back into the flight plan template for you. A quick high-level overview of what that flight's supposed to look like or gonna look like based on your departure time. Plan a route. We're all familiar with flight planning tools. What our system gives you are the most recently assigned ATC routes for a departure destination pair. I happen to pick Kennedy in Chicago. You also can pick low altitude Victor routing, the FAA preferred routes, and the coded departure routes. In the next release, which is coming next month, you'll have about 3 or 4 more options to pick from, like SID Star departures and jet routes and things like that. So that list will expand. For this purpose, I picked IFR, the recent ATC routes. This is what pops up. This is between JFK and Chicago, and it tells you the number of flights that were given, the time, the date and the time, and the altitude. It doesn't matter what the altitude is for the request. We just go in and look at the departure station and the destination, and we get all of the routes assigned regardless of the altitude. Now, if you like one of these, and you may want to take one of these because that's what you may get, you hit the select button and it brings that route into your flight plan mask. Okay, along the same lines as IFR flights, we have a service that if you sign up for it, if your flight changes, we'll send you an email or we'll send you a text message with the new route. Now, you can do one of two things. You can log into the system and change it or amend the flight plan, or call flight service and tell them, hey, this is November 123. I just got a notice that my flight's changed. Can you update my flight plan? They'll punch it in, they'll hit the amend button, and you're off and on your. The benefit of doing this is what? So when you call to get your clearance, they're going to tell you what? Cleared as filed. So in the near future, we have a feature called Easy Amend. When we send you that email or that text message, all you have to do is touch the link in it. It'll send a message to to our system, and we'll amend it for you without even, you don't have to do anything. So that's coming. VFR pilots. We've quickly realized pilots more and more want to communicate electronically. And I think the world just communicates more and more electronically. We're all communicating with our thumbs on the on the cell phones and things like that. What we do is now 30 minutes prior to your departure, we'll send you an email or a text message, and it'll have a link in it to activate your flight plan. If you touch that link, it'll send a message to flight service and we'll open your flight plan for you, VFR. But remember, the second you hit it, your flight plan's open. And when you open your flight plan, what does that do? It starts what? The search and rescue process, right? As soon as you get 30 minutes beyond your estimated time of arrival, we start looking for you. So do not hit that button until you're rolling out, you're at the hold line and you're ready to go, or boom, hit it, and then you're good to go. What I'm saying is when you're on the ramp doing stuff, don't hit the button. Wait till you get to the hold line and you're taxiing out, okay? Easy close, same thing like easy activate. 30 minutes prior to your arrival time, we will send you an email or a text message. When you land, the first thing, well, we used to, I did, when you land, you look at your watch and you're checking time. Now the first thing people do are check their phones. They want to see what phone calls they've missed or what text messages they've missed. Well, now you have an email, and it's an easy close email. You open up the email, hit the button, your flight plan's closed. That's all, simple. Any questions about that? No, pretty straightforward.
What about international flights?
I think they want you to use the microphone.
I was just wondering about the international flights that we used to, we have to call in and cancel those. Do you have that service on there?
So the question was, what about international flight plans? If it's a VFR flight plan, and where do you fly internationally? Is okay, Bahamas. If it's a VFR flight plan, and typically you're gonna file ICAO format, right? Or you're using the NAS format. We will send you the link to close your flight plan. So yes, places like going into Canada, we don't support VFR flight plans. They have to be IFR ICAO. But in your case, if we get a VFR flight plan and it's an accepted VFR flight plan from an accepted location, yes, we'll do the easy activate and the easy close for you. All right.
Yeah. Easy close for an IFR flight if I'm going into an uncontrolled airport?
No, we don't. We're working on just the opposite, a departure clearance, an electronic departure clearance, but there's some things that we need to work out with the FAA on procedures and things like that. But we do not have the ability to do a link and then your flight plan's closed. It's something we can,
But it's on the horizon.
Yes, it is actually. Every time we come to one of these shows or do something like that, it's incredible the feedback and the amount of suggestions we get, which is great because, like I said, everything you see here was built on the feedback. I mean, we didn't envision easy activate, easy close until someone said, "What about just sending me a link so I can just close your flight plan?" Well, that's how it was born. So, pilot history. Pilots wanted to know or have access to what they filed, what they briefed, and the actions that they took. So by rule, we maintain data up to 15 days. So when you hit your pilot history button, we will show you everything you've done on our website or through flight service or through a web vendor, third-party web vendor, everything you've done on there. So if you used your website to activate your flight plan, it'll be there. If you call flight service to file your flight plan, it'll be there. If you used Navigator to file a flight plan, it'll be there. So every action you take is recorded, and we give it to you. We present it to you. Scheduled email briefings. I briefed the night before. It looks good. I'm going out at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I want another briefing before I go. I schedule a briefing for 6 a.m. 6 a.m., I get an email, and it has my briefing. What I do is I look at it, and if I'm comfortable with it, then I go flying. If I'm not, if I see something in that briefing that just isn't right, I call flight service. But the bottom line here, I get to pick whatever I want to be displayed to me. I can pick whom I want to send that email to. I just pick the time and the date and the time. And at that time, a briefing is generated at that very instant and sent to me, or you, or anybody. This is, I think, one of the neatest and safest things we ever developed for pilots. How many times have you gone to the airport or en route to the airport, or it's an hour before your flight and you realize, oh, I got an AIRMET that just, you call in flight service and you got an AIRMET that popped up, or you got a TFR that popped up, or whatever. What we do is when you request alerting, we will send you an email or a text message of any adverse conditions that have popped up along your route of flight starting within 2 hours of your departure time. So you're scheduled to leave at noon, starting at 10 o'clock. Anything that pops up, TFRs, center weather advisories, they're all listed here. Any one of those conditions pop up, we'll send you a text or an email. You can do one of two things at that point. Either log on to your account, take a look at the alert, or you can call flight service. They'll explain because what you see or what you're receiving is exactly what they're seeing as well. So when you get an alert, they're getting an alert as well. And you go, hey, November 123, I just got an alert. Can you tell me what it is? And they, sure, no problem. They call it up. And the point is, rather than getting in the air and finding out you've got a center weather advisory along your route or something else, we're pushing it to you. And if you have one of these in-flight devices, we will uplink a text message to that device. Say you had a pop-up TFR. As long as it's in front of you, we'll send it to you. If for some reason that event or the weather is behind you, we won't bother you with it. But if it's ahead of you, we will uplink it to you. And we can send it to you, like I said, we have email, we have text message delivery, and this is what our website would look like if you had an alert. You click on it and it brings it up. It's a free service, and it's just a safety tool. And the details of all of this stuff, if you want, we're in Hangar C. We'll be happy to go over anything you want. Traditional SAR, search and rescue, happens 30 minutes past your arrival time, right? So you're in flight, something happens at an hour, nobody's looking for you for another 2.5 hours. Except if you have one of these devices, and the number of devices that we're interfacing with is growing weekly. If for some reason something happens an hour into your flight, what we're doing is we're monitoring your flight. We are not ATC flight following. It is not that at all. It's under the covers, DeLorem or one of these devices. They're sending us your position information. You have an active flight. What we do is just monitor the breadcrumbs along the way. If for some reason we stop receiving those breadcrumbs, we know something's wrong. Or if we're getting a position that's in the exact same location, for a fixed wing aircraft, that's not so good unless you're on the ground at your destination airport. So what we do is when we get a non-movement alert, or if we get a no alerts at all, we start looking for you right then and there. So if something happens an hour in, we start looking for you. We're not going to wait 2.5 more hours. And again, these companies, all the companies, they will not charge you extra for sending us that data. They view this as a safety thing just like we do. We don't impose any fees on them, and they're not going to impose any additional fees on you guys. Just a couple last items here. PIREP submission. We have the ability now to submit PIREPs while you're in flight. If you have the first Honeywell Sky Connect, they started doing it. They have the ability, you punch in, I don't know what their interface looks like or what exactly you have to do to, but punch in the right the right keys, it will submit a PIREP in flight. It comes into our system, we process it, we validate it, we store it, and then we send it off to the National Airspace System, and then they distribute it to all the other weather users. There's another company called AeroV. This is an app. You can download it for free. It's AeroV. This CONUS button, and it'll give you a depiction of the U.S. of where the unmanned aircraft are. I zoomed in on an area right here. The neat thing is, if you happen to file a flight plan and you happen to penetrate an area of a UAV, we will let you know about it in a tab. It just becomes part of the briefing. And this one's telling us that, yeah, I'm going to intersect this particular UAV, but it's orange, so that means it's not going to be, it won't affect me because it'll be active within an hour of my flight time. If it was going to be active during my flight time, it would have been red. But the bottom line here is what I wanted to show you is that we're being proactive. We're going out and we have the ability to put operating areas. We're giving the operators the ability to put in the areas into our system, and we're going to make them available to the flying public. The other thing that's important is that we will filter these. So if you're at 9,000 feet and you've got a bunch of UAV operators that are flying at 400 feet or 1,000 feet, you don't want to know about them. We will filter them out. I think